What is up, Pitt fans? Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of the PG Pitt Show, brought to you by FanDuel. I'm Stephen Thompson. That's Abby Schnable. We cover Pitt athletics for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And Abby, it's 3 weeks without a win. It's 340 days now in between wins against power conference opponents for Pitt. And that all makes for kind of an uncomfortable week. Pitt's got quite a task ahead of them. Their win total number from our friends at FanDuel was about 6.5 coming into this year. It's since down to 5.5. Optimism is really dwindling for the Panthers as they get set to host Boston College this weekend in their second ACC game.
Yeah, it's interesting because they have the talent, but like the fact that we are in this stage 2-2 after game 4, it's not what I was expecting when you consider how much talent that this team really has, especially because they've been up in every game that they've lost. They've had the lead and they just lost steam, I guess. Like, it's almost interesting because there's no reason that it's happening because they have the talent. And it's, yeah, if I was a Pitt fan, I'd be really frustrated, and I wouldn't blame them.
Yeah. Well, like, when you say it shouldn't, or like there's no reason why it should happen, like I agree. Like there's no, I don't know. It shouldn't happen, I guess you could say. I mean, you can't really say there's no reason, I guess,
That's
because,
fair.
Pitt has, not that you're wrong, but like there's no reason why Pitt should have blown, three double-digit leads in 2 games. That just really shouldn't happen for a team with this level of talent. I think we've talked about it really for the past 3 weeks now. It's just that the level of preparation, the level of focus, it all kind of comes back to coaching to a certain extent. But I don't think you play the way you do over these past 2 games. I don't think you lose in that fashion if it's not a collective effort. So we've talked about, the defense has kind of held up their end of the bargain, but they've made their share of mistakes too. We can put as much blame on the coaching as we want, but the players got to make plays. And then, obviously we've been pretty critical of the head coach and the offensive coordinator as well. There's a lot of blame to go around and a lot of questions still to answer. One of those questions, and I'm not sure Pat Narduzzi wanted to answer them, but look, he opened a can of worms on Saturday afternoon when he decided to bench Eli Holstein in favor for Cole Gonzales. Said he was just looking for a spark. That spark never came. But now you go into a week where, look, Eli's entire team, he goes into the season as the established starter. There was really no question about that. He comes into this game, though, and he has a really good first half, I would say. But then in the second half, it's just abysmal. 2 for 6, 54 yards, 2 interceptions. He's pulled for Cole Gonzales. His entire team sees that. The 45,000 people who I guess, there are probably fewer by this point in the game, but that was the listed attendance at Acrisure Stadium on Saturday. They all see Eli Holstein get pulled too in the game's, really key moments. I believe it was still tied when Pitt decided to go to Cole Gonzales after Holstein threw that second interception. So, Narduzzi can, avoid this question as much as he wants, but by benching Holstein in that moment, he created a quarterback controversy. So he was asked about it today. He says the team is still rocking with Eli Holstein right now. He's listed atop the depth chart. He said pretty explicitly Eli is still the starter right now. But, he's not really peeling back the curtain a whole lot. Do you think there's any chance that come Saturday afternoon, we do see a starting quarterback change and either Cole Gonzales or Mason Heinstchel is in there?
I don't necessarily think it's going to be a starting quarterback change, but I think we've learned that Eli's leash is a lot shorter than it was, because you don't pull your starting quarterback in a tie game scenario unless you're losing trust in him. You simply don't. You don't think that he's going to be able to get you out of this bind. He says it's for a spark. Yeah, maybe that's an element of it, but the likelihood of a quarterback who hasn't played in significant minutes since last season coming in and creating that spark right away is pretty low. So at that point, it almost felt like a little bit of a Hail Mary, except not an actual Hail Mary. And so it does make me think, like, yeah, if it's not this week, if he has another week or even another half, maybe even a quarter like he did in that second half against Louisville, then yeah, they're going to have to make changes, because I feel like you said it, we point a lot of fingers at the quarterback, but there are a lot of things that are happening because of his decision making. And you can try and justify it by saying it's the coaching. Absolutely, the coaching is a problem here, but the fact that Eli Holstein is throwing as many interceptions in the end zone as he is just unacceptable, very problematic, and it causes not only like the fans to lose trust in him, but his teammates a little bit. You have to think, because for the most part, the wide receivers are doing their job well. The running backs, again, maybe a little less efficient than the wide receivers, but everyone's making plays, and even Eli Holstein's making plays, but not consistently. And I think we said this weeks ago, but his highs are really high, but his lows are really low. And at this point in the season, if you want to win, it might be time to make a change. And I don't know if that's Cole Gonzales or true freshman Mason Heinstchel, but obviously we're not seeing a change in Eli Holstein game to game at this point.
Yeah, and you make a good point that, the season hasn't been wholly bad for Eli Holstein. No. Even these last two losses haven't been wholly bad. Like, he's done some special stuff. He's made some throws that make you think, wow, like it's obvious why Pitt made this guy the starter to, last season, why they rode with him going into this year, why they had so much confidence in him. But then, the lows are really maddening, and it makes you wonder how he's being developed, if he has gotten better since the start of last season, since he arrived at Pitt. And now the bad is starting to kind of outweigh a lot of the good. It's not just kind of missing throws like he did against West Virginia. It's those turnovers, gifting Louisville short fields, marring some really important red zone opportunities for Pitt. It's a handful of bad decisions leading directly to whole losses for Pitt. And that's really the problem. Holstein is still extremely talented. I think that's still true. I don't think that's really deniable at this point. But right, you expect someone going into their second year to be a little bit smarter with the football, to not make as many bad decisions in clutch moments. And Eli Holstein hasn't done that. A lot of that growth that I think we talked about with coaches, with teammates, with Eli himself during the offseason, spring ball, but into training camp, just has not shown up really, really much at all. This unit is not moving more efficiently. I haven't seen the kind of command over the offense that I think you would hope for. Quite honestly, a lot of, when Pitt scores by these big, chunk plays and these deep throws that really impress you from Eli Holstein, seems like a lot of talent kind of taking over in those moments. It's not necessarily, Eli showing some growth in terms of his ability to process, his ability to read defenses and check at the line and things like that. I just don't believe that at this juncture, Eli Holstein is elevating his team beyond its talent level. And that's one thing if you're Will Howard at Ohio State, and you have the most talented roster in the world, in the sport around you. But Pitt really needed Eli Holstein to elevate his game in order to elevate the pieces around him. I'd argue in a lot of ways this team is built around him. And so if he's not delivering, if he's not giving you what you expect, then I don't think it's unreasonable to think about making a change. And I think you're spot on in saying that his leash is definitely a lot shorter. But I mean, we even talked about this maybe – I don't know if we talked about this offline. I don't know if we've mentioned it on a show, but Phil Dracovic it took 5 games for him to be benched in 2023. And Eli Holstein hasn't been nearly as bad as Phil Dracovic. I want to make that absolutely clear. But, a guy playing much worse had a lot longer of a leash that season. Eli Holstein, now it's 4 games, and it's 2 games really where it's really only 2 games where he's necessarily not played well, and he's out. And so that's it's notable, that's, I think there is a little bit more urgency and a little more impatience in Pat Narduzzi now than maybe there was a couple years ago.
I even think back to his good performances. I think after both the Duquesne game and the Central Michigan game, me and you were saying he's not passing the eye test. His numbers were good. I'd argue that you could probably look at Pitt's statistics in general, and you would probably think they're a fairly good football team. But it's not just about the numbers. Like, they have to be making plays, and his wide receivers are making plays. I mean, Blue Hicks has had some insane catches. Poppy Williams has gotten in the places he needs to be to make the plays. And so you almost wonder if it is a personnel problem. And, there are probably a lot of people saying, sitting here thinking, well, Cole Gonzales hasn't made a splash in his appearances either. And to push back on that a little bit, he's been put into really crappy positions every single time he's entered the game. I mean, I think about when he had to enter against West Virginia, it was very last minute because Eli Holstein got hit in the head and had to go, shove cotton up his nose because he was bleeding. That's not a great position to be in, even though you're right in the red zone. And then yesterday, that's a lot of pressure. 2 days ago, Sunday, or Saturday, man, I'm all over the place. You're putting him in at the end of the game. You're tied, and you're expecting him to make magic. Like, the expectation for Cole Gonzales was really high, and it was at the same time hard to live up to those because you can't. The pressure that was put on him in those situations, I think we have too small of a sample size to say that he wouldn't be the right person to replace Eli. But like, I just have to wonder how much longer we or the coaches let Eli do this without, massive improvements, and you decide to just pull the trigger and play Cole, or even start developing Mason Heinstchel, who they have been really hot on since he got onto campus in January.
Right, because at the end of the day, Cole Gonzales, and even though he showed up late, this is a guy who had an understanding of Cade Bell's offense from multiple years of playing within that system. Cole Gonzales didn't beat out Eli Holstein. No. And, maybe there wasn't a true competition in that sense. But if Cole Gonzales was really better than Eli Holstein, more talented, whatever you want to say, he would be the starter. There's a reason he's your backup, right? Heinstchel, there's, that's not as true to a certain extent. Like, it's hard to imagine a true freshman is ever going to get the reps that are necessary to beat out a starter like that. It would be some pretty extraordinary circumstances. So, it's not as simple as saying, well, you can just go to the backup and assume that you're going to get some better results out of him. I don't think that's always true. I think there's some, backup quarterback theory going on there where everyone just assumes that because we haven't seen the backup quarterback yet, that he can't be any worse than what you've seen out of the starter. And that's not true. So, I can appreciate that Pitt doesn't want to make this decision lightly. But I don't think it necessarily hurts you in this situation to say, look, we haven't gotten what we've expected out of Eli, and we're going to, open it up a little bit. We're going to see what Cole can give us, and we'll make a decision by the end of the week or something like that. But Narduzzi was extremely adamant that it'll be Holstein going into this week. We'll see what happens by the end of the week. We'll get to watch a little bit of practice tomorrow. So it'll be interesting. And, like we said after the game on Saturday, whether if they do make a change, whether they go with Gonzales or Heinstchel, kind of signals what they think about the remainder of the year. Mm-hmm. I don't think you would go to Heinstchel without, assuming that he can win you some games, but that's a more forward-looking move. And it seems like, maybe going to Gonzales would be a more short-term solution as opposed to trying to develop Heinstchel a little bit more. So a lot of interesting stuff. I mean, I don't expect Pat Narduzzi to really peel back the curtain very much this week and tell us, honestly, who's going to start. But I think for right now, it's pretty safe to assume that Holstein will start, maybe with a bit of a shorter leash. I don't think it would take until, 6.5 minutes in the fourth quarter for them to make a change if things aren't going well with Holstein at the helm. Abby, changes aren't only maybe coming at quarterback. There are some other changes on the depth chart that we got to see this week ahead of kickoff against Boston College. But the changes that we saw, not necessarily Pitt's choice. Kieth Goueva starting right guard. Left guard. Oh, get those sides messed up. Left guard Kieth Goueva, 6-year senior, transfer from Richmond. Goes down with a leg injury against Louisville. It seemed pretty nasty at the time. He was carted off, put in an air cast. And Pat Narduzzi confirmed this morning what I think a lot of people expected. He is done for the season. So Pitt loses a starting offensive lineman. That is, I believe, the 4th year in a row that a starting offensive lineman has been lost. for the season to an injury. At least it's not the left tackle like it had been for the past 3 years, but still, nevertheless, a huge loss. And now Pitt's going to be turning to redshirt sophomore Ryan Coretta as that new guard in the starting lineup now.
Yeah, you got to give Kieth a little bit of credit with the fact that he had a season-ending injury and still took the time as he was being carted off to chirp at the Louisville bench, because, like, honestly, I don't think anyone would really be in their right mind to do that after as ugly as an injury as it was. But, kudos to him. Ryan Coretta is interesting because, I feel like we honestly haven't talked about him a lot. Maybe when we've been asking Narduzzi questions about like the depth, he's always brought Ryan Coretta up. But this is a guy who's done, Narduzzi said, 80% of his practice at center and only 20% at guard, which makes me a little bit apprehensive because you would like to see that number be a little bit higher, but he was going the backup center. So it makes sense that he was taking more snaps there, but it makes things a little bit dicier when you have a guy who doesn't have as much experience in that guard spot. Now, they are fairly similar-ish in that they're more similar than the center and the tackle. And so there's crossover, and usually, as Stephen, maybe he mentioned this earlier, maybe if it was offline, you usually train both if you're a guard and you're training center, which is helpful. But this is still a guy who didn't earn the starting spot, and arguably not the guy that they have said is the next highest below the starters, which would be Kendall Stanley. It's just a measure of positions. This is just the hand that has been dealt, which is unfortunate for Pitt.
Yeah, well, and look, it's kind of a wild card, right? Like, Ryan Coretta hasn't played a ton, so that means he could be really good, and we just don't know. But also the fact that he hasn't played does tell you a little bit of something. So eager to see what you get out of him. You're, I think, correct that Ryan Coretta is not their fifth best offensive lineman, or not their sixth best, I guess you would say. Kendall Stanley probably is. But I think this is the best guy for the spot that they're in. And Narduzzi said as much. We're going to see if that ends up playing out. But, Pitt, once again, has to kind of adjust on the fly and find another backup offensive lineman to help them fill things out. I believe it was 15 different starting offensive line combinations used over the past 2 years, the 2023 and 24 season. We're going to get a 17th actually now. We're going to 16th start the year, and now 17th in 3 years. So really the injury bug never stops biting for Pitt. They had some other injuries on the defensive side of the ball too, but this is the kind of injury that Pitt was theoretically insured against when they recruited a bunch of transfer offensive linemen this offseason. So we'll see if that plays out and that if the depth is actually there for the Panthers. Of note also on the depth chart, Isaiah Montgomery is going to fill a backup center spot, at least on the depth chart. I wonder if, for example, Lyndon Cooper goes down, do you move Coretta back over to center since he has the experience? Isaiah Montgomery hasn't exactly played there a ton. Is he going to, then slot up into guard where he was before? And also Tay Ray is now your backup right guard as well. So a little bit of shifting on the offensive depth chart. We'll see if that actually plays out, if Pitt kind of backfills those positions in the event of another injury in that sense. Abby, we are going to now look back a little bit. We're looking forward to what does Pitt do with the quarterback situation, the offensive line. But this morning, some quotes made the rounds on social media. Louisville kind of did some early week press conferences as well after their win over Pitt. And there were two quotes, one from co-defensive coordinator Ron English and safety D'Angelo Hutchinson, that I thought were really notable. The first one, and kind of for different reasons. So I'll read off the first one, or at least a snippet from the first one. And this is from the defensive coordinator English, the co-DC. Open quote, "So Blue Hicks makes a play. Blue made that play, which was a hell of a play. And then they make the play right before halftime. But what I told them at halftime was, hey, look, man, this is the deal. Pitt, they can't score on a chunk play. If Pitt can't score on a chunk play, they ain't scoring, because they're going to self-destruct right before they get to the end zone anyway. So let's just keep the ball in sight and in front. Don't give them chunks," end quote. That's extremely concerning. I think we heard all through training camp about how Pitt kind of has the ability to make more adjustments offensively because you're in year two of the system. And this was kind of a strategy Louisville employed, or that English describes here, that other teams ran really successfully against Pitt in the second half of last year. It should be concerning that there is a book out that Pitt has not solved yet. There's a book out on how to defend them. It hasn't really been solved yet. Pitt in the second half was not really able to move the ball as effectively. Again, they were really bad in the red zone, all day. They scored a lot on, again, those chunk plays. So I don't know. It's just really bad when this is what's coming out about your offense. 2 days after a loss. If it's obvious for a team like Louisville to see it, then obviously every other team in the ACC that Pitt plays down the stretch is going to be able to see it too. And you had a whole offseason. It's not like this is a new phenomenon where teams are just starting to defend you like this. Like I said, it's going back to the Cal game in week 7 of last year. Like this has been a known problem for Pitt, is that defenses are able to keep them in front and count on the fact that Pitt is going to kind of step on a rake and get in their own way. So it's bad that this is kind of becoming so obvious to opponents.
And it shows how one-dimensional like the offense is, in that, you usually say one-dimensional as in the run game and the passing game, but I mean it in the sense of this is a team that they know can make explosive plays, but that's the only way that they're going to score. And it's interesting because the amount of times that Narduzzi brings up explosive plays, like even today, he was like, we had more explosive plays than Louisville. And usually when you have more explosive plays, you win. And it makes me wonder, are they emphasizing too much on those explosive plays, as opposed to, talking about how those are really great, but we also need to be able to have these, just grinding out plays to get third downs. I mean, they only converted on 1 third down against Louisville, and it's evident because Louisville's saying it 2 days later that this is how this team plays, and that's a problem because it makes them easier to defend. It makes it harder for them to have those plays, those non-explosive plays, because they're so locked in on that, because they know that that's the only reason and way that Pitt is going to score is an explosive play, and a just chunk play. And yeah, it's just very concerning for the longevity of this team this season, really. And also just like, is this Cade Bell's offense? Is this the problem with Cade Bell's offense right now? Or is this more of a personnel thing? And it's hard to even like discuss, because it's like, again, based on what, Cade Bell came in and we were told what Cade Bell was going to deliver, this should not be happening. And it's not just because Desmond Reed is not on the field, mind you.
Right, because they were able to run the ball and move the ball on the ground. Like they had options, and I think the one thing that this speaks to is, not just adjustments on the coaching side of things, but like discipline. You say grinding out drives and everything like that. And it's true. Like sometimes you do have to do that. But if a team knows that an opposing defensive coordinator telling you that we know you're going to kind of scuffle in the red zone and that we're not going to get burned if we give up some yards, that means that they know your team isn't straight, just disciplined enough to kind of sustain these drives, to make play after play and do what's required when the pressure is on. And I think you saw that. I think it was pretty plain to see, and you outlined very well why that is concerning. And this other quote from D'Angelo Hutchinson, a safety from Louisville, is concerning for a completely different set of reasons, and I think honestly more important reasons. Hutchinson said, open quote, "Coach actually made a point. We looked at Pitt and they didn't want to play anymore. So we just took that and ran with it, basically," close quote. What more is there to say? I mean, you hear a lot. You sometimes hear coaches say, we saw midway through the game or at some point in the game that we broke their will. That's kind of a classic coach speak thing when you are able to run away from a team in the second half. That's very different from saying this team quit, or that this team didn't want to be on the field, or this team didn't want to play. That is that makes it sound more like Pitt's choice. And whether or not it's actually true, I don't want to pretend like I am in the mind of every, Pitt athlete or anything, or that, any of them have indicated that, that they quit or that they stopped giving full effort at the end of that game. But if something that happened on that field indicated to a Louisville coach, which they relayed to their players, and the players really saw it too, I guess, that Pitt wasn't playing with the same kind of effort on the field in the second half than they were in the first half. Which part of that could have been, the number of plays, right? The time of possession was really in favor of Louisville. Pitt's played a lot of plays over the past 2 games, the Pitt defense, that is. But still, it's just not something that you want out there about your program. It's not something you want your opponents to notice.
And I think it goes back a little bit to that whole grinding it out kind of idea, is that, yeah, you're going to be put in crappy situations at times. Sometimes you are going to blow a 10-point lead, even if you're playing your best football, which Pitt has not been doing. And then it's like, you can't give up. And I'm not, that's the vibe that I'm getting from the quote. I'm not saying that Pitt did. I don't know. There definitely feels like a little bit of a lack of effort in that fourth quarter, but who knows if that was, really fatigue in there too, with the amount of plays that they have been running. And it's just interesting because an elite football team, you would never even think that they weren't giving up. You wouldn't even, an opponent wouldn't even say that, because right. You knew that they were going to play through all 4 quarters. And that is evidently what teams are seeing that Pitt is not doing.
Right. And, the reasoning behind it, I think, is less important than the fact that an opponent noticed it, mm-hmm. And that this is out there. And it's a confluence of a lot of things. It's the fact that we're kind of worn down by West Virginia and lost in overtime. And then you lose another 7-point game where it clearly looks like your defense is worn down in the second half. And Pat Narduzzi kind of even acknowledged as much after the game. So whatever the reasoning, and I think both of us, we're not going to accuse Pitt's players of like not trying or not giving full effort, but something happened in that second half where they were either not able or not giving, 100% or not playing at full capacity, I guess I should say, in that second half. And that's what ultimately led to that loss. And look, if that's happening in week 5, it does not bode well for the rest of that schedule. Like I said, Pitt's win total from our friends at FanDuel has already gone down a whole win since the season started. And so Pitt is now on the edge of, where maybe you thought they had an outside chance of contending for the ACC. Now they are, fighting for bowl eligibility. And that is not where anyone imagined this team would be in year 11 of Pat Narduzzi's tenure, not where you would imagine they would be coming off of last year, even given the way that it ended. So not a whole lot to grab onto from that Louisville loss, and honestly a lot more bad than good coming out of these past 3 weeks. Pitt's going to try to rebound this Saturday against Boston College. We'll see how they're able to do that. We've got tons more coverage coming from the South Side, all about Pitt football coming this week, both on this channel that's at PG Pitt. So make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything, but also follow all of our written work at post-gazette.com. Thank you all for tuning in to another edition of the PG Pitt Show, brought to you by FanDuel. For Abby and I, we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.